Hello and welcome to Real Obscure. My name is Kevin H. Shaw, and in tonight's episode I'll be discussing a movie that was once described as The Evil Dead, as made by Ray Harryhausen. From 1970, it's the Forgotten Fright feature, Equinox. Like Sam Raimi's breakout shocker, Equinox began life as a short movie. Created by an aspiring director named Dennis Muren and his friends Jim Danforth and Dave Allen, the movie was filmed in their free time over the course of 2.5 years, filming at weekends and whenever time allowed. However, they had no money for lighting rigs, so the movie could only be shot with natural lighting, weather and time of day permitting. The camera could only record 30 seconds of action at a time, and they had no way to record audio, so all sound had to be added in post. And given they were filming on an ad hoc basis for such a long period, well, this makes for some interesting continuity. However, what they did have was an ace in the hole, in the form of the effects skills of the trio. Muren had grown up admiring the works of Ray Harryhausen and Willis O'Brien, of King Kong fame, and had started making his own short stop-frame animation movies as a child. Now regular Real Obscure fans will know how much I love the work of Ray Harryhausen, and I even covered one of my favourite movies of his in an earlier episode. Go check out my discussion of Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger to learn more about this amazing animator's work. Anyway, deciding such animations could be used to tell a horror story, Muren set about making a movie that would pay homage to these great animators and their incredible creations. That movie was Equinox: Journey into the Supernatural. Fast forward a few years, and Muren approached a production studio with his movie in hand, hoping to use it as a showreel to showcase his incredible talents. However, the executives at Tony Lynn Productions were so impressed with the short that they wanted to expand it into a full-length feature, and so hired editor Jack Woods to film additional scenes to fill the movie's runtime. Now simply entitled Equinox, the movie was extensively rewritten by Woods, who rather sneakily also took full credit as a director, crediting Muren with the special effects alone. And he also added a new subplot involving a new character, Asmodeus, as played by, yes, you guessed it, Jack Woods himself. Now, despite Woods apparently wanting to do everything for himself, the movie does have quite a few interesting celebrity connections. Ed Begley Jr., yes, the Ed Begley Jr., was the camera assistant. The character of Professor Waterman is played by Fritz Leiber, the famed writer of such stories as Conjure Wife and Smoke Ghost. And the character of Dr. Johansson is dubbed by Forrest J. Ackerman, of Famous Monsters of Filmland fame. The movie received a theatrical release in 1970, and interestingly was later released in an abridged form on Super 8. More recently, it was released on DVD by Criterion, so next time you watch an episode of Criterion Closet Picks, watch closely, as maybe somebody will be cool enough to choose it as one of their selections. So, what's it all about? After a wonderfully evocative title sequence which, is basically riffing on the titles of 1960s adaptation of The Time Machine, the movie opens in a dramatic fashion, following the advice of Donald and Davy Stott to start off with a little explosion to warm things up. Although in this case, it's a significantly large explosion. We're now introduced to our protagonist, David Fielding, who is played by Edward Cornell, who, reeling from the explosion, discovers the body of Susan, played by Barbara Hewitt, lying dead in the woods. David flees from a giant unseen terror, making his way to the highway, but as he attempts to flag down help, he sees with horror that the approaching vehicle has no driver. The car accelerates and strikes him, but before the unmanned vehicle can finish him off, a second car pulls up and its occupants rush over to assist him. Now, rather confusingly, we then cut to a reporter named Sloan, played by Jim Phillips, who, as he arrives at the hospital, explains his mission. A year and a day ago, David Fielding was brought into this hospital, raving about being chased by the forces of evil. A police investigation found 3 dead bodies and that one Professor Waterman had disappeared. Sloan is now here to follow up with David to see if there's been any change in his condition that might help him draw a line under the events he experienced. Now, this whole sequence is a prime example of how a movie can be made in the edit. We have multiple voiceovers and scenes of people having discussions that just happen to take place without showing their faces, with the entire narrative being constructed from unrelated footage and post-audio. I love this kind of creativity where it's about taking what you have and figuring out how to make it what you need. Anyway, after an unsuccessful meeting with David, where Sloan somehow manages to end up with the crucifix David is obsessed with, the story unfolds in a flashback as the reporter listens to a recording of David's statement made before he became catatonic. David explains that it began with a call from Dr. Waterman, his geology professor, who wanted to meet with David at his cabin in the mountains. At the time of the call, David was with his friend Jim, who had arranged a picnic for that day along with his girlfriend Vicky and a blind date for David named Susan. Rather than cancel their plans, the foursome decide to combine their picnic with a visit to Dr. Waterman and so head out into the country. Let's round up the cast real quick. Vicky is played by Robin Christopher, Susan is played by Barbara Hewitt, and Jim by Frank Bowes Jr., who is better known by his stage name of Frank Bonner and for his role as Herb Tarlek in WKPR in Cincinnati. Leiber and Ackerman aside, Bonner is the only cast member who really had any success following the movie's release. They arrive, and after an exciting discussion about who forgot to fill the water jug, the foursome set off into the woods to find Dr. Waterman's cabin. Cue the first of many scenes involving footage of people wandering around and having dubbed conversations about, well, not much. It's low-budget movie making 101 that your cast must be shown walking to their destination in order to pad out the runtime, and this is no exception. Vicky wanders off to find a stream, without telling Jim, David and Susan, who arrive at Dr. Waterman's cabin only to find it destroyed, caved in as if crushed by some outside force. Again, in typical low-budget movie fashion, we see the three discussing the cabin in close-up shots, intercut with shots of the model cabin. They're shocked to discover they're not alone. A ranger on a horse appears, almost magically, and asks if they need help. He introduces himself as Asmodeus, and when discovering that they're friends of Dr. Waterman, he explains that he hasn't seen him, and that they're more likely to find him back in town. Now, I'm laughing there because I know not everybody is into their horror histories or familiar with the occult, but I just find it hilarious that the ranger is named Asmodeus and nobody notices. It's like saying,
"Hello, I'm Ranger Satanicus Diabolos."
Well, they shouldn't be too surprised when he turns out to be the bad guy. Anyway, Vicky has wandered off, and as she's exploring, she comes across a castle in the distance. And it's here we see some of the movie's rather excellent special effects for the first time, with this wonderful matte painting. Now, I know in this age of CGI, it's easy to scoff at old school practical effects, but I've always been a fan of the latter, and here they're really well executed. There's a real sense of craft about this movie. It was made by people who cared about what they were doing, and it's much more than simply being a load of binary crunched by a data farm somewhere in India and then slopped onto the screen for us to passively digest. MCU, I'm looking at you. As the castle isn't within walking distance, the foursome leave, but soon come across a mysterious cave entrance and, more alarmingly, they hear a maniacal laugh from within and discover some strange footprints in the dirt outside. Fashioning makeshift torches from dead grass and sticks, they make their way inside. Vicky again, damn it Vicky, wanders off by herself, finds a human skeleton and encounters a strange old man who is seemingly living in the cave and is quite insane. As she screams, Dave, Jim and Susan rush to her assistance, and by that I mean run around in the dark as we hear various "this ways" and "no, back that ways" and watch a black screen. Eventually they find Vicky and watch confused as the old man gives them an ancient locked book before ushering them out. I mean, I get it. Bro is just chilling in his cave, enjoying a laugh, and next thing he knows, there's a bunch of random people waving fiery torches around in what could well be his bathroom. Bemused, the foursome head back into the woods to have their picnic, and as they eat, the men begin trying to translate the book. Dave begins reading a passage in Latin, but is stopped by Susan, who recognises it as the Lord's Prayer being recited backwards. They finish eating and head off toward the castle once more. But suddenly Dr. Waterman appears in the woods and, running at full pelt, snatches the book away from David and disappears into the trees. The men give chase until David tackles Waterman and, as the two fall, the doctor hits his head on a rock and, to their horror, is dead. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Waterman is played by the legendary author Fritz Leiber, which may come as a surprise, but Leiber actually came from a family of actors and did appear in a few movies. Confusingly, his father has the same name, so he's often misattributed with roles Leiber Sr. took. But in this case, this is the real deal author. Racked with guilt, David and Jim drag the dead doctor from the stream and begin to head back to the girls. But an overwhelmed David runs back to the body, only to find he's gone. And so the foursome soon find themselves in the centre of a nightmare, as the mysterious Asmodeus plots to retrieve the book, sending his agents and the forces of darkness after them, as they face invisible portals, vanishing castles, giant apes, and demonic possession. Now, Equinox is very much a movie of two halves. On the one hand, there are just so many scenes of people walking around in the woods whilst having a dubbed conversation about how they're walking around in the woods. It's like that Netflix mandate about having characters explain what they're doing for people who are looking at their phones while they're supposedly watching the movie. I get they couldn't afford to fill the movie with great action sequences or stunts, but at the same time, it gets very old very quickly. However, when it kicks into gear, it does so with gusto. There are some genuinely brilliant special effects in this movie in the form of the stop frame animation sequences by Murren. The guy went on to become a founder of George Lucas's ILM, and it's no wonder when you see just how good his work is. As a kid who grew up before Star Wars, the films of Ray Harryhausen were my go-to fantasy movies, with Jason and the Argonauts and the Sinbad movies truly showcasing the brilliance of the man's work. So I've always been a fan of this method of realising movie monsters, and the work here is incredibly impressive. Like Harryhausen's best, the animated creatures here, which include a 30-foot tall gorilla and a winged demon, have a wonderfully natural feel to them. Murren clearly invested hundreds of hours into each sequence, as the movements are smooth and fluid, and in many instances they interact with the human actors. And they're hardly short sequences either. This is no Requiem for a Tuesday. The movie also makes use of some pretty effective forced perspective and composite shots in a sequence that sees the group being pursued by a giant. Yes, it's just a guy in a costume, either shot with low angles or composited into the image at a larger scale, but it's still surprisingly effective. Again, it showcases that kind of practical effects ingenuity we've lost with the move to digital effects. There are some truly beautiful matte paintings and trick photography techniques used here, and I really would urge you to take a look, as I'm sure you'll be impressed if you're a fan of these charming, old-school techniques. Now, trigger warning. There's a surprisingly disturbing scene where Asmodeus forces Susan to the ground and begins to assault her. It's hardly explicit, going no further than him attempting to plant slobbering kisses on her and placing his hand on her stomach, but it's clearly non-consensual, and it does feel quite nasty and out of place in a movie that otherwise would be ideal for younger viewers. This is much more of a monster adventure movie than it is an outright horror, and this scene just feels out of place. It's not really suitable for kids, and just be aware that it is there. Anyway, it's time now to discuss the movie's climax as we enter
the spoiler zone.
So events continue to unfold with Asmodeus, who David realises is probably the devil about 20 minutes before the movie's climax, attempting all he can to take the book from the couples, and following a number of run-ins and dangers, including doppelgangers and demonic possession, the plot catches up with the movie's opening sequence of Dave running for his life. However, this time around we see the previously unseen force that so scared him. A mysterious Grim Reaper-like figure who tells him he will die in a year and a day from now. With the story concluded, we return to the hospital. Frustrated that David is still unable to offer an explanation for the events, Sloane leaves. But as he crosses the parking lot, we see Susan heading into the hospital, a look of malicious intent upon her face as David mutters about needing his cross. And then we see an amazing title card of The End, complete with a question mark. So maybe it's not what we think, even though it is. Now, as I mentioned, it does bear a number of similarities to The Evil Dead. A group of young people go off into the wilds to visit an old cabin. There's a book of evil spells. A professor translates the book, and reading from it summons forth evil entities. And there's even demonic possession. Now, obviously some of this can be attributed to the production of both movies. Many low-budget films feature younger protagonists. It appeals to the horror target audience. Actors looking to break into movies are often younger, and from a writer's perspective, young people tend to be more reckless and innocent, meaning you can get away with them doing a lot of stuff older characters would look at and go, and just walk away from. It's also extremely common to film such movies in locations that are freely available, and that usually means the local woods. There's no need to build sets, they're usually remote enough so your production won't be disturbed by passers-by, and from a storytelling point of view, it plays into the fears we all have of being lost or straying off the path. Having characters being possessed is often a cheap way of introducing a monster without having to fork out too much for special effects or creature designs. Slap on a bit of eyeshadow, tell your actor to look evil, and boom, instant monster. And of course the idea of forbidden tomes is about as old as storytelling itself, with both Equinox and The Evil Dead sharing a common ancestor in Lovecraft's universe, where tomes such as Unsprechliche Kulten, the Book of Iban, and the granddaddy of them all, the Necronomicon, frequently forming the backbone to the plot. Now, the Evil Dead's effects artist Tom Sullivan is on record saying he was familiar with Equinox, so it's possible Raimi had also seen the movie, although Sullivan has no recollection of the two ever discussing it. Perhaps they were both subconsciously channeling it, or perhaps it's simply a coincidence. But either way, Equinox is certainly worth a watch, particularly if you're a fan of the Evil Dead. It's almost a Bizarro Universe version, just with a lighter tone and more discussions of potato salad. Anyway, on that note, thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of Real Obscure. This episode of Real Obscure was created, written, directed, and features water jugs filled by me, Kevin H. Shaw. You can learn more about the podcast by visiting realobscurepod.com, where you'll find news, updates, and links to our other episodes on a variety of streaming platforms. You can also get in touch with us by emailing hellorealobscure@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please like, share, comment, or give us a follow or subscribe. You could also give us a review, as this really helps the show grow. Our theme tune, From Manfred und Siggy, was created using Udio, as was our background theme, The Monster Dub. Equinox is copyright 1975. All content used here is for educational and commentary purposes under Section 107 of the Copyright Act, Fair Use, and remains the property of the respective copyright holders, presented here for the purposes of critique, commentary, and discussion. No copyright infringement is intended, so please don't sue us.